We live in a world drowning in noise, constant chatter, endless distractions, and a storm of thoughts that never seem to rest. We speak, but do we ever truly listen? What if the answers we desperately seek aren't in words, but in silence? What if quietness isn't emptiness, but the doorway to true peace? Today, I'll share with you a story, one that reveals the hidden power of silence and how it can transform not just your mind, but your entire life. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover might change everything. So, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Once upon a time, in a great kingdom, there was a powerful king. He had wealth, fame, and every luxury imaginable. Yet, despite having everything, he felt restless. His mind was never at peace. No matter how much he achieved, there was always an emptiness inside him. He tried everything to fill this void: entertainment, travel, and even deep discussions with wise men. But nothing worked. One day, he heard of a great Zen master who lived in a monastery deep in the mountains. People said this master possessed a wisdom so deep that even the greatest minds bowed before him. Desperate for answers, the king set out on a journey to meet him. After days of travel, he finally arrived at the peaceful monastery. There he found the Zen master sitting under a large tree in absolute silence. The king bowed and spoke, "A great master, I am troubled. My mind is never at peace. Though I have everything, I feel as if I have nothing. Please help me find peace." The master opened his eyes, smiled gently, and said, "Then be silent." The king was confused. "Be silent? But I have come seeking wisdom. Shouldn't I learn something?" The master replied, "You have spent your life listening to the world. Have you ever truly listened to yourself?" The king was taken aback. I don't know." The Zen master nodded and said, "Then let's begin your lesson. For the next 7 days you shall live in this monastery. But there is one condition: you must remain completely silent." The king hesitated, 7 days without speaking? How could he do that? But something inside him whispered, this might be the answer. So, he agreed. The first day was unbearable. The king's mind was filled with endless thoughts, memories, worries, frustrations. He felt as if he was trapped inside his own head. By the second day, he noticed something strange. Without the ability to speak, he began to observe more. The sound of birds, the rustling of trees, the soft footsteps of monks walking in meditation. He had never truly noticed these things before. By the third day, something even more surprising happened. His mind, once filled with noise, began to settle. He felt lighter, as if a great weight was being lifted. On the fourth day, as the king sat in meditation, a young monk approached him. "Your Majesty," the monk whispered, "outside the monastery, there is a man demanding to see you. He says it is urgent." Curious, the king walked to the entrance. There, a furious nobleman stood. "You," the nobleman shouted. "How dare you sit here in silence while your kingdom faces problems? Your ministers are betraying you, and you sit here doing nothing." The king felt a surge of emotion, anger, frustration, and the urge to defend himself. But then, he remembered his vow. He took a deep breath and remained silent. The nobleman continued yelling, expecting a response. But the king stayed calm, and slowly, the nobleman's rage began to fade. Seeing the king's unshaken peace, his own anger lost its power. At that moment, the king understood the power of silence. By the seventh day, the king felt like a different man. His thoughts were clear, his heart was light, and for the first time in his life, he understood that true peace comes from within, not from the world outside. On the final morning, the Zen master asked, "What have you learned?" The king bowed and replied, "I have learned that silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is where true wisdom is found." The master smiled. "Now you understand." The king returned to his palace a changed man. He spoke less, but when he did speak, his words had power. He listened more, and because of that his people trusted him, and in his silence, he finally found the peace he had been searching for. As the king returned to his palace, his ministers and advisors were eager to hear about his journey. They expected him to come back with grand philosophies or complex teachings, but instead they found a man of few words. At court meetings, he no longer interrupted or spoke unnecessarily. When faced with conflicts, he listened first and spoke only when needed. And when others tried to provoke him, he responded with calmness instead of anger. At first, people were confused. Has the king become weak? Some whispered. Why does he not argue or shout like before? But over time, they noticed something remarkable. His silence commanded more respect than his words ever did. One day, two ministers were caught in a heated argument in the royal court. They yelled and accused each other, trying to prove their points. The entire court waited for the king to intervene, but he remained silent. Minutes passed. The tension in the room grew, and then something unexpected happened. One of the ministers suddenly fell silent. Then the other did too. Without the king saying a single word, they realized how foolish their argument was. It was in that silence that truth became clear. The king had discovered something powerful. When words fail, silence speaks louder. One evening, as he sat in the royal garden, he saw a group of children playing. They ran, laughed, and shouted joyfully. But one child stood apart. She sat quietly under a tree, watching the others. Curious, the king approached her. Why are you not playing with them? He asked gently. The girl smiled and said, Because I enjoy watching. When I am quiet, I see things they don't see. The king was intrigued. And what do you see? She pointed at the sky. Look at the birds. They don't shout like us, but they still understand each other. Look at the trees. They don't speak, but they still grow. Look at the river. It flows without a single word, yet it nourishes everything. The king was astonished. This little girl had understood something that most adults never did. He knelt down and asked, who taught you this wisdom? She giggled. No one. I just listened to the silence. And at that moment, the king realized that silence was not just the absence of sound. It was a teacher, a guide, a friend. But not everyone understood this lesson. One day, a neighboring kingdom declared war. The enemy king was known to be aggressive and ruthless. He believed in power through force, not wisdom. Messengers arrived at the palace, urging the king to respond immediately. Your Majesty, we must prepare for war, they pleaded. But instead of reacting with fear, the king did something unexpected. He sat in meditation. For hours he remained silent while the court grew restless. Finally he opened his eyes and said, Send a message to the enemy king. But do not challenge him. Instead, invite him to a meeting of silence. The court was confused. A meeting of silence? But they obeyed. When the enemy king received the message, he laughed. Is this a joke? A meeting of silence? What kind of foolishness is this? But his advisors were intrigued. Perhaps he is trying to show strength in a different way, they suggested. Curious, the enemy king agreed. A week later, both kings met in a grand hall. No words were spoken. They simply sat in silence, looking at each other. Minutes passed, then hours. At first, the enemy king felt restless. He expected a debate, an argument, a display of power. But instead, he was met with stillness. And then something changed. For the first time, he began to truly observe. He noticed the wisdom in the other king's eyes. He felt the peace that surrounded him, and he realized he had been fighting battles his whole life, but had never known peace. By the end of the meeting, the enemy king stood up and bowed. You have won without a single word, he said. There will be no war. The power of silence had defeated the power of force. And so, the king's wisdom spread across land. People from different kingdoms came to learn from him. not through words or lectures, but through quiet presence. One day, a scholar approached the king and asked, "Your Majesty, how did you master silence?" The king smiled and replied, "By failing many times." The scholar was surprised. "Failing?" The king nodded. "In my youth I thought wisdom was in speaking. I tried to prove my knowledge, to debate, to convince others. But the more I spoke, the less people listened. Then I tried another way. I began to listen. And in listening, I discovered silence. And in silence, I discovered myself." The scholar bowed deeply. That night, the king sat under the same tree where he had once met the Zen master. He closed his eyes, and in that sacred silence, he felt something beyond words. Peace. The peace that had once felt impossible was now within him, and it had been there all along. As the days passed, the king's newfound wisdom transformed not just his own life, but the entire kingdom. The people noticed how their ruler, once troubled by worries and anger, now carried himself with a calm presence. His silence was not emptiness, it was full of meaning. When he walked through the market streets, people naturally fell silent in his presence, sensing a peace they could not explain. Children who used to be restless in the palace gardens now sat quietly, observing nature just as their king did. And warriors once eager to prove their strength with words and weapons now sought wisdom in stillness. One day, a soldier approached the king with a troubled heart. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "I have spent my entire life training for battle, sharpening my skills with the sword. But now as I watch you, I wonder, have I wasted my life? Have I spent too much time learning how to fight, and too little time learning how to live?" The king looked at him with kindness and replied, "Tell me, when you hold a sword, do you grip it tightly?" "Of course, Your Majesty. A warrior must have a strong grip." The king smiled. "And what happens if you grip it too tightly?" The soldier hesitated. "If I grip it too tightly, my hand tires and I lose control of my movements." The king nodded. "And if you hold it too loosely, then the sword may slip from my hand and I will be defenseless." The king gently placed his hand on the soldier's shoulder. "This is the balance of life. Hold too tightly and you become rigid. Hold too loosely and you lose your way. Silence is like this balance. It is not about abandoning everything. It is about knowing when to hold on and when to let go." The soldier bowed, understanding something that no battle had ever taught him. Word of the king's wisdom spread far and wide, even beyond the borders of his kingdom. Travelers came from distant lands, not to seek riches or power, but to experience the presence of the silent king. One such traveler was a renowned poet, known for his eloquent verses that moved people to tears. When he arrived at the palace, he asked the king, "Your Majesty, I have written thousands of words in my lifetime, yet none have brought me the peace you seem to carry in your silence. Tell me, what is the secret?" The king chuckled softly. "Let me ask you, great poet, when you write, do you place words everywhere on the page?" The poet shook his head. "No, I leave spaces between the words so that they can breathe and be understood." The poet shook his head. "No, I leave spaces between the words so that they can breathe and be understood." The king nodded. "And that is the secret of silence. Just as a poem is made not only of words, but also of the spaces between them, life is made not only of actions, but also of the moments of stillness in between." The poet was stunned. He had spent his life searching for the right words, yet it was in silence that he finally understood their true meaning. The seasons changed and years passed. The king, now much older, continued to live in his quiet wisdom. One day, as he sat beneath the tree where he had first learned the power of silence, a young prince from another kingdom approached him. The prince was eager and restless, filled with questions. Your Majesty, I have studied philosophy, read sacred texts, and debated with great scholars, but still, I do not feel at peace. Tell me, what must I do? The king looked at the young man with deep compassion. Come, sit with me. The prince sat beside him under the tree. Minutes passed in silence, then an hour. The prince fidgeted, confused. Finally, he could not contain himself any longer. Your Majesty, why do you not answer me? He asked, frustrated. The king turned to him with a gentle smile. My dear prince, I have been answering you all along. You are just too busy waiting for words to hear the lesson. The prince's eyes widened, and in that moment of stillness he understood. Silence was not an absence. It was a presence. Not an emptiness, but a fullness. A gateway to wisdom, a bridge to true understanding. The prince bowed deeply, his heart filled with gratitude. He had come searching for knowledge and had found something greater. The wisdom of silence was now his to carry forward. And so, my friends, as you listen to this story, ask yourself, where can you find silence in your own life? In a world filled with noise, with endless distractions, with voices telling you what to think, what to do, and who to be, where is your quiet space? Perhaps it is in the early morning before the world wakes up, or in the evening as the sun sets. Perhaps it is in a quiet walk, a deep breath, or the moment before you speak when you choose to listen instead. True wisdom is not in filling the world with more noise. It is in knowing when to be silent. It is in understanding that sometimes the most powerful messages need no words at all. So, my dear friends, I challenge you today. Spend just 5 minutes in silence. No phone, no music, no distractions, just you and the quiet within. And when you return, you may just find that you are not the same person who entered that silence. Because silence is not empty, it is full of answers. If this story has spoken to you, even in silence, let's continue this journey together. Hit the like button if this message resonated with you. Share this wisdom with someone who needs it. Comment below. How do you embrace silence in your life? And if you seek more peace, more mindfulness, subscribe and be part of this growing community of wisdom seekers. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time, stay mindful, stay peaceful, and embrace the power of silence.